In my last video, I made a cross-slide lock because the DRO scale was blocking the factory lock that was on the right side of the carriage. The problem is it occupies the space for the follower rest. So I decided to incorporate a slide lock into the follower rest. The follower is hollow on the opposite side, so I need to make an aluminum spacer to fit in that hollow space. I need it to be even with the top side of the cross slide. So I'll transfer a mark on the front and the back side of the follower. Now I need to measure the distance between the inside of the follower and the cross slide. I have a piece of aluminum I'm going to use to make the spacer. Now I'm going to face off the aluminum with the milling machine so I have a true surface to work off of. I turn the workpiece over and I need to mill it down to that line, and that's the approximate thickness that I need it to be. Now I'm just double checking. I don't want it to be any thicker than the cross slide. Now it's time to transfer the angle cuts to make sure it fits inside the follower. I'm using the bandsaw to cut off most of the material, and then I'll mill it to size. The casting is tapered on the inside, so I'll use the belt sander to custom fit it to the taper. But first I need to mill the bottom of the cavity to make sure it's perfectly flat. I tried a bunch of different ways to mount this in the vise with spacers and a machinist jack, but I can't get it to line up because one side is machined and the other side isn't. It's just a casting. So I gave up on that idea. So I flipped it over and mounted the machine side on some 1-2-3 blocks. So now I can mount it in the vise and machine the casting side to make it flat. Now I move the 1-2-3 blocks to the side that I just machined, and now I can put it back in the vise and continue on with machining out that cavity. I'm using a 1/4 inch end mill because I want to be able to stay tight in the corners, and I'm just going to use the same end mill to machine the whole bottom surface. It's a slow process following the angles with the end mill. I sped through some of the video, but this is the end result. Now I can work on tapering the sides with the belt sander. Now that the spacer fits inside the follower, I can take it over to the lathe and bolt it into the carriage. I still need to fine-tune the length, and it looks like I need to take at least 1/4 of an inch off to start with. The rest of the dimensions look like a good fit. I touched off on the surface and set the DRO on 0, so now I can just keep milling until I get down to 1/4 of an inch. I mounted the spacer back in the follower, and it looks like I have a good fit now. Now I need to drill the hole for the stop screw, and I use the DRO to find the center of the workpiece. You adjust the X and Y axis to 0 with the milling table, and that's the center of the workpiece. The stop screw is going to be 7/8 brass, just like I did on the other cross slide stop. But I don't want to make a 7/8 hole in the follower. So the hole in the follower is not going to be any bigger than the head of a socket head cap screw. This is a 5/16 stainless steel cap screw. So it looks like the hole for the head of the screw is going to be 15/32. So now that I have a 15-30 second hole, I'll position the spacer exactly where it needs to go and use a transfer punch to mark the location for the hole and the follower. So now I'll use the 1, 2, 3 blocks again to mount the follower in the milling vise. You can see my punch mark in the follower. I'm using a carbide pointer to locate the punch mark for the milling machine. (15-30 seconds isn't a standard bolt size, so I found a metric bolt that would fit in there tight to keep everything together. Now I can work on the anchor screws that are going to hold the spacer into the follower. I'm going to use 1032 screws, so I'm using a 5/32 drill bit. And I'm drilling through both the spacer and the follower. Here I flipped the follower over and mounted it back on the 1, 2, 3 blocks. And I'm going to relocate the holes with the 5/32 drill bit. I'm going up 2 drill bit sizes to make the hole larger for the 1032 screw clearance. I touched off with the DRO and I'm going to go down about 1/4 of an inch. I'm drilling through cast iron, so I'm going to watch for the drill bit shavings to change from cast iron to aluminum and then stop. I'm also going to counterbore the screw holes to countersink the head of the screws. Because I enlarged the hole in the follower, I'm only threading the aluminum spacer.
This is when Kansas City can really come together and be there for each other. It was such a special. I will say though, we do have 2 suspects in custody. Victim are caught on walking into hospitals. Some of the details, we'll know why that happened.
Family's impact. I start with them. I'm incredibly upset, disappointed. I was there with my wife. I was there with my mother. We never would have thought that we, along with Chiefs players, along with fans, hundreds of thousands of people, would be forced to run for our safety today. I think that I'll let the investigation shake out before coming any further conclusion. Your timeline point, I was inside of Union Station. We heard something. None of us. Officer, join me now on eyewitness to the shooting.
We saw multiple bodies laying there with gunshot wounds. Probably 10, 12 shots, just bang, 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 bang. And then we did not hear another shot.
Yes.
Now I can start enlarging the hole for the 7/8 inch brass screw. I'm just going to keep stepping up drill bits until I get to 7/8. Because of the odd angles on the spacer, I knew it was going to be hard to put it in the chuck on the lathe to do the threads. So I opted to use a 7/8 14 threading tap. I looked all over town locally, and the only place I could find a tap that size was at a Napa auto parts store. And the other thing is, all they had was a bottom tap. So it was slow going threading the spacer. You can't see it in the video, but I'm using a centering pin in the lathe chuck to get the tap started straight.
Have been professional associates and friends. Since 2019, there was no personal relationship between them. In November 2021, at the time of the appointment, and defendants offered no support for their insistence that they exercise of any prosecutorial discretion in this case was impacted by that personal relationship. And it matters just as much as that testimony.
And actually, during the course of his testimony, he actually said in 2020 that they were talking a lot on the phone, and we went for about 15, 20 minutes. We couldn't quantify how many times a day, week, or month, but obviously some sort of relationship blossomed from 2019 to 2020. And listen, I'm going to leave the legal analyst.
Whatever we're covering is less and less important. And for Fonnie Willis and the prosecutor that she chose to help her adjudicate the case, that's arguably the biggest.
Now I can start working on the 7/8 brass screw. I'm going to make it a little bit longer than it needs to be to start with, to give myself room to do the threading. I'm using the cutoff blade to give myself a relief cut for the threading tool. I'm doing 7/8 14 threads. So to do 14 threads per inch, I need to set the gearing up on the lathe. So the chart says to use position 8 and position B. So on the carriage feed gearbox, you move the gear selectors to the appropriate letter and number. Now I can shorten the screw to fit the spacer. With the carriage locked, I'm going to stop here so I can figure out how deep to drill a hole for the 5/16 cap screw.
dinner time, I've left here 7 o'clock, gone to get something to eat, and I don't even know that they would have taken him or if he would have driven himself, but they've taken me to do that. But we're talking very few, very far in between. Most days I don't even eat lunch, and when I do, it's because my assistant has heated up some bag, something, and I eat through meetings and eat in my office. It's not a practice of mine to go to lunch. During the time period, so in 2020,
Now I can finish my cut. While it was still in the lathe, I tightened the cap screw as tight as I could get it. Next, I'm going to drill and tap it for a set screw.
Gone to fundraisers. In fact, Bonnie Willis was criticized for going to a fundraiser that raised money against one of the defendants that she was prosecuting. So it all seems to be a bit of a mess. If you were able to take Bonnie Willis out of this case and reassign it, would that be considered to be in law a fair outcome in the near term?
It's possible. I mean, if this judge thinks that either of these primary witnesses has lied under.
I need to face off the bottom of the brass screw, and I didn't want to ruin the threads by putting it back in the lathe chuck. So I'm going to use a 7/8 collet and turn my milling machine into a lathe.
Because I kind of had him high around his upper body, and the other guy that jumped in.
My camera focused on the lathe column instead of where I wanted it to focus. I had to use a mirror to check the surface. I checked on the internet to see if I could find the right color touch-up paint for my lathe. And on a forum, someone said that the heirloom white satin Rust-Oleum was a good match for theirs. Not so much for mine. So I just went with a satin white Rust-Oleum. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out.